After the accident, he was left under the bridge with wounds and mud all over his body. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn, wooden floorboards. Buddy, a golden retriever with fur the color of honey, stretched languidly, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood. He yawned, a wide, pink-tongued display of contentment, before rising and padding over to the back door. His tail thumped a happy rhythm against the cabinets as he waited expectantly. "Morning, sleepyhead," chuckled John, Buddy's human, as he opened the door. "Ready for your walk?" Buddy's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He bounded out into the crisp morning air, a blur of golden fur against the vibrant green of the backyard. John, a man with kind eyes and a weathered face, followed at a more leisurely pace, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. Their house sat on a quiet street in a small town nestled amidst rolling hills. It was a modest home, filled with the comforting scent of baking bread and the sounds of laughter. John and his wife, Mary, had lived there for over 40 years, their children grown and flown the nest. Buddy had been a part of their lives for the past 5, a constant source of joy and companionship. Their morning walks were a ritual, a time for quiet reflection and shared contentment. Buddy, ever the explorer, sniffed at every blade of grass, every intriguing scent carried on the breeze. John, meanwhile, would stroll along, his gaze taking in the familiar sights and sounds of his neighborhood. This morning, however, was different. A sense of unease settled over John as they passed by Mrs. Henderson's house. Her usually vibrant flower beds were overgrown, and the curtains remained drawn. He hadn't seen her in a few days, which was unusual. "Something's not right, Buddy," he murmured, a frown creasing his brow. Buddy, sensing his human's concern, tilted his head and whined softly. He nudged John's hand with his wet nose, offering silent comfort. John patted Buddy's head, a small smile returning to his face. "You're right, boy. We should check on her." As they approached the front door, a loud crash from inside startled them both. Buddy let out a sharp bark, his protective instincts kicking in. John, his heart pounding, quickly knocked on the door. "Mrs. Henderson, are you all right?" he called out. Silence, then a faint groan. John didn't hesitate. He tried the doorknob, finding it unlocked. He pushed the door open, Buddy close at his heels. The sight that greeted them was one of chaos. Furniture was overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the floor, and Mrs. Henderson lay sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, her face contorted in pain. "Buddy, stay here," John instructed, his voice firm. He knelt beside Mrs. Henderson, gently checking for a pulse. Relief washed over him when he found one, though it was weak. He quickly dialed 911, explaining the situation. As he spoke, he noticed Buddy, who had disobeyed his command, nudging Mrs. Henderson's hand with his nose. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Buddy?" she whispered, a weak smile gracing her lips. John watched in amazement as Buddy, his tail wagging gently, licked away a tear that rolled down Mrs. Henderson's cheek. In that moment, he knew that Buddy was more than just a pet. He was a true companion, a furry guardian angel. The paramedics arrived shortly after, taking over Mrs. Henderson's care. As they wheeled her out on a stretcher, she reached out a trembling hand to stroke Buddy's head. "Thank you, Buddy," she whispered. "You saved me." John, his heart swelling with pride, knew that this was just the beginning of Buddy's story, a story of loyalty, love, and the extraordinary bond between humans and their canine companions. Life, as Buddy knew it, was a tapestry of simple pleasures. Chasing squirrels in the backyard, belly rubs from Mary, the comforting weight of John's hand on his head. He loved the familiar creaks of their old house, the smell of freshly baked apple pie, and the warmth of the sun on his fur as he napped by the window. One crisp autumn afternoon, this peaceful existence was shattered. John, eager to take advantage of the beautiful weather, decided to take Buddy for a drive. They piled into his old pickup truck, Buddy excitedly taking his usual spot on the passenger seat, head out the window, tongue flapping in the breeze. John hummed along to an old country tune on the radio as they drove down the winding country roads. The leaves were a riot of color, fiery reds, burnt oranges, and golden yellows, creating a breathtaking spectacle. Buddy, ever alert, watched the world whiz by. His ears perked at the rustling leaves and the chirping of birds. As they rounded a sharp bend, a deer suddenly darted into the road. John slammed on the brakes, the truck swerving violently. Buddy, caught off guard, was thrown against the dashboard. He yelped in pain, his vision blurring. The truck skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch with a bone-jarring thud. Buddy, disoriented and terrified, scrambled out of the open window, his whimpers echoing in the sudden silence. He limped to the side of the road, his head throbbing, his legs aching. He looked back at the truck, his heart pounding. John was slumped over the steering wheel, the windshield cracked, blood trickling down his forehead. Buddy whined, trying to get back to John, but the twisted metal of the truck door blocked his way. He barked frantically, his cries for help lost in the vast emptiness of the countryside. Fear gnawed at him. The familiar scent of John was mingled with something sharp and unfamiliar, the smell of gasoline and blood. He paced by the roadside, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the road, Buddy's instincts took over. He knew he couldn't stay there. He had to find help. He had to find his way home. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the accident scene and started walking. He followed the road, his injured paws leaving bloody tracks on the asphalt. The world, once a place of joy and adventure, now seemed vast and threatening. He walked for what seemed like hours, the pain in his legs growing with each step. He was lost, alone, and scared. The happy life he had known, with its comforting routines and loving companionship, now felt like a distant memory. As darkness enveloped the countryside, Buddy stumbled upon a bridge. Exhausted and shivering, he sought shelter under its concrete arches. He curled up on the cold, damp ground, his whimpers swallowed by the rushing water below. He was alone, injured, and abandoned. The world he knew had vanished, leaving him to face the unknown, a tiny, vulnerable creature in a vast and unforgiving world. The harsh reality of his situation settled upon Buddy like the cold, damp air beneath the bridge. The comforting rhythm of his life, breakfast with John and Mary, walks in the park, chasing squirrels in the backyard, was replaced by the gnawing pangs of hunger, the throbbing pain in his injured leg, and the overwhelming sense of loneliness. The bridge, his temporary refuge, offered little comfort. The constant roar of the river below was a jarring contrast to the peaceful quiet of his home. The damp concrete chilled him to the bone, and the stench of stagnant water filled his nostrils. He spent his days scavenging for scraps of food, his once shiny coat now matted with mud and grime. He ventured into the nearby woods, his senses heightened, his instincts guiding him. He caught a glimpse of a rabbit darting through the undergrowth, its white tail bobbing like a beacon. He chased after it, his injured leg protesting with every stride, but the rabbit was too quick, disappearing into its burrow before he could reach it. Disappointed and exhausted, he returned to his makeshift shelter under the bridge. The days blurred into one another, each filled with the same struggle for survival. He longed for the warmth of human touch, the sound of a familiar voice, the comfort of a loving home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the river, Buddy heard a rustling in the bushes. He lifted his head, his ears perked, his body tense. A pair of glowing eyes pierced the darkness, and a low growl sent shivers down his spine. A coyote emerged from the shadows, its lean body taut, its teeth bared in a menacing snarl. Buddy, despite his fear, stood his ground. He growled back, his hackles raised, his tail tucked between his legs. The coyote circled him, its eyes never leaving his. Buddy knew he was no match for the wild predator, but he was determined to protect himself. He lunged at the coyote, snapping his jaws, hoping to intimidate it. The coyote, surprised by his aggression, backed away slightly. It circled him again, testing his defenses. Buddy, his heart pounding, maintained his aggressive stance. The standoff continued for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, the coyote, sensing Buddy's unwavering determination, turned and disappeared into the darkness. Buddy, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed onto the cold ground, his body trembling. He had survived another day, another challenge. But as he drifted off to sleep, the image of the coyote's glowing eyes lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the dangers he faced in this unfamiliar world. He longed for the safety of his home, the comfort of his family, the love that had been so abruptly taken from him. The morning mist hung heavy over the river, shrouding the bridge in an ethereal silence. Buddy, his fur damp with dew, lay curled up beneath the concrete arch, his sleep troubled by nightmares of the accident and the menacing coyote. He was awakened by a new sound, a sound that cut through the usual symphony of nature, the sound of human voices. He lifted his head cautiously, his ears perked, his body tense. Two figures emerged from the mist, their outlines blurry in the early morning light. They were talking in hushed tones, their words indistinguishable to Buddy, but their presence filled him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He watched as they approached the bridge, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were a man and a woman, both bundled up in warm jackets, their faces etched with concern. Buddy, his instincts wary after days of solitude, retreated further into the shadows. "There he is!" the woman exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. "Poor thing, he looks so scared." Buddy, his heart pounding, remained hidden in the darkness. He was unsure of these humans, their intentions a mystery. He had learned to be cautious, to trust no one. The man knelt down, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Hey there, fella. We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help." Buddy, his curiosity piqued, inched closer. He sniffed the air cautiously, trying to decipher their scent. They smelled of kindness and concern, a stark contrast to the harshness of his surroundings. The woman reached out a gloved hand, her movements slow and deliberate. "Come here, sweetie. We're going to take you to a safe place." Buddy hesitated, his instincts battling his desire for human contact. He longed for the warmth of a touch, the comfort of a kind voice. He took a tentative step forward, then another until he was close enough to sniff their hands. The woman gently stroked his head, her touch sending shivers of relief down his spine. He leaned into her touch, his tail wagging tentatively. He was still wary, but a glimmer of hope flickered within him. The man carefully examined Buddy's injuries, his face creased with concern. "He's got a nasty wound on his leg," he said. "We need to get him to a vet." They gently lifted Buddy, his body stiff and sore. He whimpered softly, but he didn't resist. He was too exhausted, too relieved to be in the presence of humans who cared. They carried him to their truck, a large, white van with the words, "Animal Rescue," emblazoned on the side. Buddy was placed on a soft blanket in the back, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As the truck rumbled to life, Buddy watched the bridge recede into the distance. He was leaving behind the harsh reality of his solitary existence, the constant struggle for survival. He was heading towards an unknown future, but for the first time in days, a spark of hope ignited within him. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the echoing barks of other dogs filled Buddy's senses as he was carried into the bustling animal hospital. He was placed on a stainless steel examination table, the cold surface a stark contrast to the warmth of the blanket in the rescue van. He whimpered softly, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar room, taking in the masked faces and the glint of medical instruments. A kind-faced veterinarian, Dr. Emily, gently examined his injuries. Her touch was gentle, her voice soothing as she spoke to him in soft tones. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, Buddy?" she murmured, cleaning the mud and debris from his wounds. Buddy, still wary, allowed her to examine him. He winced as she probed his injured leg, but he didn't resist. He sensed her genuine concern, her desire to help. "You've got a fractured leg and some infected wounds," Dr. Emily explained to the rescue workers. "We'll need to do surgery to repair the fracture and clean the wounds." Buddy's ears perked up at the mention of surgery. He didn't understand the words, but he sensed the gravity of the situation. He whined softly, his tail tucked between his legs. "Don't worry, Buddy," Dr. Emily reassured him, stroking his head. "We'll take good care of you." He was prepped for surgery, his matted fur shaved, his body scrubbed clean. He was given a sedative, the world slowly fading into a hazy blur. He felt a prick in his leg, then a warm sensation spreading through his body. He drifted off to sleep, his fears and anxieties momentarily forgotten. When he awoke, he was in a small, quiet room. A soft blanket cushioned his body, and a gentle warmth enveloped him. He was groggy and disoriented, his leg throbbing with a dull ache. He tried to stand, but his leg buckled beneath him. A young woman with a friendly smile entered the room. "Hey there, sleepyhead," she greeted him cheerfully. "How are we feeling?" Buddy, still dazed, wagged his tail weakly. He recognized the scent of kindness and compassion emanating from her. "My name is Sarah," she introduced herself. "I'm a volunteer here at the shelter. I'll be taking care of you while you recover." Over the next few weeks, Sarah became Buddy's constant companion. She cleaned his wounds, fed him nutritious meals, and took him for short walks in the shelter's enclosed yard. She spoke to him in soft tones, her voice a soothing balm to his troubled soul. Buddy slowly but surely began to heal. His leg mended, his wounds closed, and his fur regained its golden sheen. He started to trust Sarah, his tail wagging excitedly whenever she entered the room. He also began to interact with the other dogs at the shelter, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. He played with them in the yard, chasing after tennis balls and wrestling in the grass. He was starting to feel like himself again, the playful, affectionate dog he had always been. One day, Sarah came to his kennel with a bittersweet expression on her face. "Buddy," she said softly, "I have some good news and some bad news." Buddy tilted his head, his ears perked, his eyes questioning. "The good news is that you've been adopted," Sarah announced, a smile breaking through her somber expression. "A lovely family saw your picture on our website and fell in love with you." Buddy's tail wagged excitedly. He was going to have a home again, a family to love him. "The bad news is," Sarah paused, her voice catching in her throat, "I'm going to miss you terribly." Buddy whined softly, nuzzling his head against her hand. He would miss Sarah too. Her kindness and compassion had been a lifeline during his recovery. The next day, a middle-aged couple arrived at the shelter, their faces beaming with anticipation. They introduced themselves as Tom and Susan, their voices filled with warmth and affection. Buddy, his tail wagging furiously, greeted them with enthusiastic licks and playful nudges. As he left the shelter with his new family, Buddy looked back at Sarah, his eyes filled with gratitude. He was embarking on a new chapter in his life, a chapter filled with hope and the promise of a loving forever home. The car ride was a blur of new smells and exciting sights. Buddy, perched on Susan's lap in the back seat, watched with wide eyes as the world whizzed by. He whimpered with excitement, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the seat. Tom, glancing at him in the rearview mirror, chuckled. "Someone's eager to get home," he remarked, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Their house was a charming two-story nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a sprawling backyard, complete with a towering oak tree and a colorful flower bed, beckoned Buddy with promises of endless adventures. He bounded out of the car, his nose twitching with anticipation, and immediately set about exploring his new domain. The first few days were a whirlwind of new experiences. Buddy was introduced to his new bed, a plush cushion nestled in a cozy corner of the living room. He was showered with affection, receiving endless belly rubs and ear scratches from his doting new parents. He explored every nook and cranny of the house, his tail wagging excitedly as he discovered new treasures. A squeaky toy hidden under the sofa, a forgotten tennis ball in the backyard, a sun-drenched spot on the living room rug perfect for afternoon naps. However, as the initial excitement wore off, a sense of unease began to creep in. Buddy missed the familiar routine of his old life, the comforting scent of John and Mary, the sound of their voices. He missed his morning walks with John, the quiet companionship they shared. He missed the familiar creaks of their old house, the smell of Mary's freshly baked apple pie. He started to withdraw, spending his days curled up in his bed, his tail no longer wagging with its usual enthusiasm. He ate less, his playful energy replaced by a listless lethargy. Tom and Susan, concerned by his sudden change in behavior, tried everything they could to cheer him up. They bought him new toys, took him for long walks in the park, showered him with affection. But nothing seemed to work. One evening, as Tom and Susan were preparing dinner, Buddy suddenly let out a mournful howl. The sound echoed through the house, its raw emotion sending chills down their spines. Susan rushed to his side, her voice filled with concern. "Buddy, what's wrong?" she asked, stroking his head gently. Buddy whimpered softly, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He couldn't explain his feelings, his longing for his old life, his confusion about this new reality. He just knew that he felt lost and alone. Tom and Susan exchanged worried glances. They had hoped that Buddy would quickly adjust to his new home, but it was clear that he was struggling. They realized that they needed to be patient, to give him time to heal, to show him that he was loved and cherished in this new family. They decided to create a routine for Buddy, similar to the one he had with John and Mary. They started taking him for walks every morning, just like John used to do. They made a point of spending quality time with him, playing fetch in the backyard, cuddling with him on the sofa, talking to him in soothing tones. Slowly but surely, Buddy began to respond. He started wagging his tail again, his eyes regaining their sparkle. He ate with more enthusiasm, his playful energy slowly returning. He started to bond with Tom and Susan, his heart opening to their love and affection. One day, as they were playing fetch in the backyard, Buddy suddenly stopped, his ears perked up, his body tense. He looked towards the fence, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. He let out a soft bark, his tail wagging tentatively. Tom and Susan followed his gaze, their curiosity piqued. They saw a figure walking towards them, a familiar figure with kind eyes and a weathered face. It was John. Buddy's bark hung in the air, a question mark in the quiet afternoon. He stood frozen, his tail wagging hesitantly, his eyes darting between John and his new parents. Tom and Susan exchanged a surprised look, a mixture of confusion and apprehension swirling within them. John, his face etched with a mix of joy and uncertainty, slowly approached. "Buddy?" he called out, his voice trembling with emotion. "Is it really you?" Buddy, overcome with a rush of emotions, let out a joyful bark and sprinted towards John. He leaped into his arms, licking his face with unrestrained enthusiasm. John, tears welling up in his eyes, hugged Buddy tightly, burying his face in his fur. "Oh, Buddy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Tom and Susan watched this reunion with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Buddy had found his original owner, the one he clearly loved so dearly. Sadness that their time with this wonderful dog, who had wormed his way into their hearts, might be coming to an end. John, finally releasing Buddy from his embrace, turned towards Tom and Susan, his face etched with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for taking care of him, for giving him a home when I couldn't." Susan, her eyes glistening with tears, smiled warmly. "He's a special dog, John. We were happy to have him, even if it was just for a little while." The next few hours were filled with explanations and shared stories. John recounted the accident, his injuries, and his frantic search for Buddy once he had recovered. He explained how he had never given up hope, how he had continued to put up posters and search the surrounding area, driven by the unwavering belief that he would find his beloved companion. Tom and Susan, in turn, shared their experiences with Buddy, his initial struggles, his gradual acceptance of their love, and the joy he had brought into their lives. They spoke of his gentle nature, his playful spirit, and his unwavering loyalty. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the backyard, a difficult decision loomed. Buddy, sensing the shift in mood, sat between John and Susan, his head cocked, his eyes filled with questioning. John, his heart heavy, knelt down and looked into Buddy's eyes. "Buddy," he said softly, "I love you more than anything, but I can see that you've found a good home here, a family who loves you just as much as I do." He paused, his voice catching in his throat. "I want you to be happy, Buddy, and I think you're happy here." Tears streamed down Susan's face as she reached out and hugged John. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding." Buddy, sensing the finality of the decision, nuzzled his head against Susan's leg, then looked up at John with a soft whimper. John, with a bittersweet smile, knelt down and gave Buddy a final hug. "Be happy, old friend," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As John walked away, Buddy watched him go, his tail drooping slightly. He felt a pang of sadness, a longing for the familiar comfort of his old life. But then he looked at Susan and Tom, their faces beaming with love and affection, and he felt a warmth spread through his heart. He knew he was home. Life with Tom and Susan settled into a comfortable rhythm. Buddy, now fully integrated into his new family, thrived in the warmth of their love and affection. The initial anxieties faded, replaced by a deep sense of belonging. He knew without a doubt that he was home. His days were filled with simple joys. Morning walks with Tom, chasing squirrels in the backyard, afternoon naps in sun-drenched spots, and evenings curled up at Susan's feet as she read. He learned new tricks, mastering the art of fetch with impressive speed and precision, and even managing a clumsy roll-over that never failed to elicit laughter from his doting parents. He became a fixture in the neighborhood, his friendly demeanor and wagging tail winning over even the most skeptical of neighbors. He befriended the children next door, patiently enduring their enthusiastic hugs and clumsy attempts at petting. He even charmed the grumpy old Mr. Henderson from down the street, who, despite his initial gruffness, often slipped Buddy a treat from his pocket. The seasons changed, painting the world in vibrant hues. Buddy reveled in the crisp autumn air, chasing fallen leaves with abandon. He delighted in the winter snow, bounding through the white expanse with joyful abandon. He welcomed the arrival of spring, his senses awakened by the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the chirping of birds. One warm summer evening, as Buddy lay nestled between Tom and Susan on the porch swing, a sense of contentment washed over him. He looked at his human companions, their faces etched with love and happiness, and he felt a warmth spread through his heart. He had found his forever home, a place where he was loved unconditionally, a place where he truly belonged. He closed his eyes, the gentle rocking of the swing lulling him into a peaceful slumber. He dreamt of chasing squirrels, of playing fetch, of warm hugs and gentle strokes. He dreamt of his old life with John and Mary, a bittersweet memory that now held a place of honor in his heart. He dreamt of the accident, the fear and loneliness, the struggle for survival. But these dark memories were now overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of love and belonging he felt in his new home. He awoke to the sound of Susan's soft laughter. She was looking at him with eyes filled with affection. "You're a good boy, Buddy," she murmured, stroking his head gently. "We're so lucky to have you." Buddy, his heart overflowing with love, licked her hand in response. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that he was loved, he was cherished, he was home. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking array of colors, Buddy closed his eyes once more, his heart filled with gratitude for the second chance he had been given. for the forever home he had found.